and we're going to introduce each other, and then we're going to just chat for a brief minute about how we actually met, which is kind of a fun story. And then, excuse me, we have a, just kind of a short kind of Q&A. We're each going to read a little bit from the work that we're talking about. And then hopefully you guys will have some questions and we can have a conversation. One of the really cool things about a small group is that you're able to, you know, maybe really have a discussion, which is kind of sweet. So anyway, Christine Shields Corrigan is a 2-time cancer survivor, wife and mom, and she gives voice to the beautiful ordinary in her lyrical and practical essays. Her work about family, illness, writing, and resilient survivorship has appeared in anthologies, magazines, and other publications, including the Brevity Blog, Grown and Flown, Horn Pond Review, the Potato Soup Journal, an anthology, Purple Clover, Ravishly.com, Wildflower Magazine, and the Writer's Circle 2 anthology. Chris's essay, Not Back to But Forward, about how her cancer experiences helped her cope with COVID-19, is included in Heroics, Women's Lived Experience During the COVID-19 Pandemic, an anthology that draws together the stories of 52 women across the US during the COVID-19 pandemic, forthcoming from Pact Press in March of 2021. A graduate of Manhattan College and Fordham University School of Law, Chris built a successful career as a labor and employment law attorney and as a legal writer and editor. After surviving cancer in midlife, Chris became a freelance writer. She also teaches creative nonfiction for an adult education program, provides writing workshops for cancer support groups, and is the chair of the programming committee of the Morristown Festival of Books. So it's wonderful to be able to be here and talk to Chris about her book.
And it's wonderful to be here with Laraine and talk about her book. Well, Laraine is a writer, professor, and a grief therapist. Her books include Writing Begins with the Breath, Embodying Your Authentic Voice, The Writing Warrior, Discovering the Courage to Free Your True Voice, On Being Stuck, I love that, Tapping into the Creative Power of Writer's Block, Lost Fathers, How Women Can Heal from Adolescent Father Loss, the novels Ghost Swamp Blues, Into the Garden of Gethsemane, Georgia, and Gathering Lights, a novel of San Francisco. She is the author and illustrator of The Grief Forest, a book about the things we don't want to talk about. And her memoir, A Constellation of Ghosts, a speculative memoir with ravens that I had the opportunity to read, will be released in October 2021 from Regal House, and it is fabulous. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The Manifestation, pardon me, in Tiffernet, the Arizona Republic, and has been widely anthologized. She won the Barbara Debbing Award for Women for her fiction, and her nonfiction has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize. She's been on the Arizona's artist rosters and taught nationally at the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health, the Omega Institute, the Antioch Writers Workshop, ASW's Desert Nights Rising Stars, and the Tucson Book Festival. She has worked at the Hospice of the Valley, the New Song Center for Grieving Children, Camp Pause, a grief camp for kids, and has received grants to bring writing and workshops to women in transitional housing and women in addiction recovery. She's the founder and editor-in-chief of Hags on Fire, an online zine dedicated to women's writing about perimenopause, menopause, and aging. She holds an MFA in creative writing and a master's in counseling psychology, and she's a tenured professor at Yavapai College in Prescott, Arizona. And also, in case that's not enough, she's also a private book coach. So, and Laraine and I actually have never met in person, but we did meet through an online writing class that we took, I want to say last spring, kind of like in the, middle of the quarantine.
It was early. It was like early summer, wasn't it? It was
May or something.
Yeah.
corporeal writing in Portland, which is Lydia Yuknovich's writing workshop. And she gave me such wonderful feedback on my work. And there were things that we were both seeing in each other's writings that were so weirdly similar. Like it was like I had a spirit animal in Arizona, like my writing doppelganger in Arizona. So you can add to that.
Yeah, we just keep finding more and more things that we shared. Not all of them cancer, like just amazing things like Beverly Cleary books and just the ways of so many similar ways we have of coping and kind of thinking about things, that it was just really, I remember reading her work and like, you're me. And then she would comment back on my work with something similar. And it was really rewarding. And I if you guys don't know who Lydia Yuknovich is and that program, Corporeal Writing, I can't recommend that enough either. If you're looking for writing workshops, they have lots of them going on all the time. And of course, they're all virtual now. So yeah. So I'm going to kick off the questions and we're just kind of going to alternate back and forth. So Chris, you came to creative writing relatively recently. I mentioned that, you're an attorney and had a successful law career. What made you want to write, again, Surviving Cancer Twice with Love and Lists, and then actually take that step to share it with the world?
So I had a lot of writing, as Laraine said, a lot of writing in my life, but not so creative other than like travel journals I would keep whenever we went on vacation. But following my cancer diagnosis in 2016, I spent a year in treatment and kind of came to a crossroads when I turned 50. And I had a lot of time to think about what it was I really wanted to do when I grew up. Did I want to go back to practicing law? Did I want to go back to my legal marketing business? Or did I want to do something entirely different? And I opted for entirely different, like maybe I'll write a book.
Yeah.
But I knew I didn't know how to do that. So I spent probably a solid year and a half, I want to say, taking writing classes and writing workshops, and eventually got myself into a writing group where I was accountable for pages every week and wrote and edited my way to a manuscript over the course of those 3 years. So like from 3 to 4 years, start to finish. And one of the reasons I wrote again and decided to put it out into the world, it was kind of like the funny reason was, again, was never supposed to be a book. It was supposed to be a list for my surgical nurse navigator, who stopped me one day and said, hey, do you think you could write down some tips or tricks to, that I could share with other patients from a patient's perspective? And I was like, yeah, sure, I can do that. No problem. And then I went home and I was like, why did you agree to do that? That was very, very not smart. I was in the middle of it. And I didn't have any perspective. I couldn't imagine that I had anything to share. Yeah. And so I sort of put her request to the side. And then months later, my sense of obligation got the better of me. And I sat down at my computer and I was like, okay, I can write a list. And that list turned into like 10 essays and that I wrote over the course of a couple of months. And I sent them to her. And her first response was, hey, this isn't a list.
Yeah, right.
But she was like, this is good. You should do something with this. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll do something with this. But it was, it was very close in time to everything I had gone through. So it was very raw.
Yeah.
Definitely more like journaling than, a finished, book length memoir by any stretch of the imagination. But that it served sort of as the backbone or the basis for what eventually became Again. And then the other reason I decided as I started writing, like to stick with it and to do it, was that when I was first diagnosed, more than anything else, I wanted a book. I wanted a book like a trail map, or like your best friend who had gone through something like similar was going to sit down and tell you what was up. And I couldn't find that book. And I looked, and you can Google like breast cancer and cancer on Amazon, search, you get hundreds of thousands of titles.
Right.
But I couldn't find one that was like down to earth real to me, lots of celebrity memoirs, lots of doctors' books, lots of inspirational stories. And then I call them the dead people memoirs, the beautiful memoirs written by people who had cancer and died.
And died. Yeah.
Like, I
When
didn't
breath
want to
becomes
read
air.
those when I was
Yeah.
newly diagnosed.
No.
So then, I thought, well, maybe I'll share my experiences in the hope that they'll resonate with someone else. And as I was writing, I realized I couldn't just tell the story of my breast cancer experience as an adult. I had to go back and include the backstory, which was that I had cancer as a teenager. And I think through that process, what I ended up getting was a much more rounded and relatable story. And funny, like one of the first, emails I got from somebody who read the book was a young cancer survivor. She'd had Hodgkin's as a teenager, so just like I did. And she wrote to me that she had lived in fear for years that she was going to experience a recurrence. And that was like my deepest, darkest fear.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
she said, your words, your book helped me see that my biggest fear is something that could be managed if it ever came back into my life. And it wouldn't be easy, but she knew it would be possible. And that was like all the validation I needed. That was it. I was good. So
that's the big gift of books in general. They're those, excuse me, they're those companions for us when we don't have any roadmap, and I think what you, certainly what I took away from your book was that down to earth. It was like sitting with a friend who wasn't going to sugarcoat anything, but also wasn't going to send me into the entire pit of the depths of despair.
right.
But was just gonna, but was just like, okay, this is real. This sucks, and then this is also glorious. Like there's this, and all the way throughout your book is this through line of love, that I think makes it really, like you said, I think it really elevates. Merging those two stories really elevated the book. Yeah.
So why don't you tell us about The Grief Forest and why you wrote and illustrated it? And I have to admit, I'm wildly jealous that you can actually both draw and write and be a counselor too. But like the drawing piece is just over the top, Laraine.
Thank you. I don't think of myself as an illustrator, and it was really hard for me to put illustrations out in the world because I'm so trained in other things and not trained in that. And I'm a person who's like, if you're not trained, right, you don't go out and you don't go do the thing. But I live in Northern Arizona, and we shut down in March. And I teach at a college, like she said, and we went entirely online. We had a completely online pivot, and we're still online. I haven't set foot on that campus going on now almost 12 months. And so no one really knew, especially in those early days, like what does this mean? What is this about? What is, how long is this going to last? And writing was something that I had always been able to count on and always been able to kind of return to, like as a touchstone. And I couldn't put two words together. It was like all I could do to show up for my job, to try to get my students through, who were completely panicking, many of them losing their jobs, and struggling in all of these additional ways, getting, and then people started to get sick. And so I started to doodle. They're all done on the iPad. They're all done using Procreate. And it gave me something to do to take my mind kind of out of my mind, I guess. And I began to post the images on Facebook, just kind of like, I drew a bunny, and then woo, and people would respond to them. And I had like a little line or something about grief with each thing, because somehow I knew it was about grief. And I got all these responses from people, and my Facebook posts are not, I'm not a great social media maven. I don't get all this stuff. And I kept getting conversations around these images. And so my agent called and she's like, you have a book. And I'm like, I don't have a book. I'm not an illustrator. And she's like, oh, you have a book. Go think about it. And so I kept putting the illustrations out there, and I came to see that maybe 25 years of working with grief, both professionally and personally, what I felt through my own experience of COVID was so much collective grief. And because of my work as a practitioner, I was particularly sensitive to people who were not able to be with their loved ones when they were dying, to people who were not able to gather for whatever kind of funeral or ritual ceremony they wanted to have. And I wanted to kind of like what you were saying with, again, you wanted to write that book that was going to be this friend, this companion. And I wanted the Grief Forest to be a book that goes through the grief journey, not that there's a single grief journey, but goes through a grief journey with the griever. It's not a book that's telling you what you should be doing. It's not a book that's, here's all of the diagnostic codes for different kinds of grief. Here's all of the, it's just a character kind of going through this, this experience. And so here was kind of where I was going to just share a little bit from the book. So I'm going to show you guys some slides, and all I've done, since it's an illustrated book, I didn't want to like hold the book up to the camera because that would never work. So I made some slides of the first, kind of few pages, just to kind of show you a little bit about what it is. So we tested this and hopefully it will work. Let's see. Can you see?
Yeah.
So this is the cover, and Bunny is the protagonist of our book. And throughout the book, the balloons are the metaphor for the different griefs that the animals are carrying with them. When Bunny's daddy died, she captured her grief in a bubble the color of his soul. Bunny fell into a whirlwind of emotions and was swept away. She arrived at the grief forest, holding her grief tight. Oops. Why won't you go forward there? Welcome to the grief forest, crowed Raven. Bunny noticed Raven had other griefs in his beak and wondered what they meant, but she was too afraid to ask, and she was too afraid that Raven would take hers away, so she hid and held it even tighter. Grandmother Bunny came to meet her at the edge of the forest. It's okay, Bunny, she said. I will help you. Why is there a fire? Asked Bunny. She worried about the trees burning down and feeling pain. That's a ritual fire, said Grandmother Bunny. It's our sacred duty to keep it going. It helps honor our ancestors and keeps the connection strong between this world and the next. Bunny gripped her grief. She didn't want it to go in the fire and get burned up. See that, said Grandmother Bunny? That's Ouroboros, and he protects the grief forest. The Ouroboros symbolizes the cyclical nature of the universe, and he reminds us that life is born from death. Bunny's eyes grew wide watching Ouroboros eating his own tail, but she had to look away so she could focus on her own grief. It was getting very heavy and making her tired. But Bunny couldn't rest because she promised she would never put her grief down. It was her special chosen friend to remind her of Daddy. Sometimes she even talked to her grief. That made her feel less lonely, and she could pretend she was talking to her father. They arrived at a circle in the forest where many bunnies waited with their own griefs. Let's join them, said Grandmother Bunny. They've been waiting for us. Bunny trembled. Don't be afraid, said Grandmother Bunny, but Bunny couldn't help it. There was so much grief in the circle, she didn't know how she would breathe. So she ran away and came face to face with death, holding its own grief on a string. Bunny waited for Death to speak, but it didn't. Death held up a lantern, and Bunny decided to follow the light, even though it took her away from Grandmother Bunny and deeper into the forest. Ghosts were everywhere. Bunny realized every ghost carried a different color of grief. Were there other kinds of grief besides hers? Hers was so big, it felt like the only one in the world. But maybe others had experienced grief too. Her curiosity was almost bigger than her fear. Almost, but not quite. Follow me, said Death. Death summoned Bunny's grief toward it, and Bunny had to follow quickly so she didn't lose track of it. Are you ready to meet grief? Asked Death. Bunny thought she had met grief. She carried it with her everywhere she went. Carrying a thing and understanding a thing are not the same, said Death. Many creatures think this, but that confusion makes living hard. Bunny was surprised that Death had compassion for others. That went against the story she had been told about the meaning of death. If you want to know grief's secrets, you have to follow me, said Death, but I'm going into the cave whether you are with me or not. Grandmother Bunny had stayed with the other bunnies in the grief circle. Bunny waved to her, but she was busy reading from a big book. Bunny didn't want to walk with Death, but she also didn't want to be alone with her grief, so she gathered up her courage and entered the cave. The first creatures she met were two startled kittens. Grief catches you by surprise sometimes, said Death. Before you know it, you can float away and get lost. Bunny could relate to that. When she first got her grief, it had a mind of its own, and all she could do was hold on. Shh, said Death. Solitary Cat watched the falling leaves. She was so still. What is she doing? Asked Bunny. She's not doing at all, said Death. She's being. Bunny didn't understand what that meant, and Death didn't say anything else. Bunny thought she was supposed to do things all the time in order to be a good bunny. She had been doing a lot when her daddy died and her grief found her. But soon after, she started to do even more because it was what she knew. She was also sure that if she stopped moving, she would have died too. The next creature looked so strange. What's wrong with them? Asked Bunny. Nothing at all, said Death. Ask them what's happening. The creature laughed nervously, but said, I feel like nothing fits. I'm in so many different skins. Grief breaks you apart, said Death, and it's scary sometimes when you're in between who you were and who you're becoming. So kind of each image as she goes through the forest, she goes into the forest part, she goes under the water, and she goes back out then into the dark on the other side. Each of the animals that she meets is representative of a particular type of grief or a particular moment in the grief experience. So kind of each one of these images could stand alone and be a meditative piece or be something that could be, you know, kind of opened up for a larger conversation.
I love the imagery of the forest because when I was going through, you know, my year of cancer treatment, that was my visual image in my head. I thought that's what I saw myself going through, was walking through a forest. And
Yeah.
there is a lot of grief and grieving that goes on, you know, whether you're dealing with an illness or a loss or some other trauma.
Yeah.
And you first you want to, you know, you hold tight to it because you don't know what to do, or you do what Bunny does and you get very busy.
Very, very busy. Very, very busy.
So I just think the imagery is just so apt for so many, you know, different experiences that, you know, we all share, you know.
Yeah, I think it, you know, there's not one way to experience grief, obviously, and there's so many different manifestations of it, but it's lonely. It's really something that you're doing alone, even if you have a support system. And a book can be a companion in a way that that humans sometimes can't be, because it becomes that communion with you and the characters, or you in the words, or you in the pictures. And you know, books have saved me so many times, and I wanted Bunny to be a friend to the griever, not a condescending professor of grief, but like just a journey of someone go with you, because it's a road.
Yeah, it definitely is a road.
Yeah.
Um,
So would you, Chris, share a little bit about your cancer experience?
sure. So,
Experiences, I should say.
so in 2016, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I went for my annual mammogram, and the radiologist walked in the room instead of the tech with the postcard. And I knew, my first reaction was like, well, this can't be good.
Right.
And, she said, you have a junky cyst. And I was like, okay, doctor. And she's like, you have to have a biopsy. So I was like, all right, fine. I got that scheduled. A couple of weeks later, I had my biopsy. And then on a perfectly ordinary night in March, the day before my older son turned 15, I got a call. So I'm going to read a little bit from, again, to do March 2nd. Jim, groceries for Tom's birthday sleepover. Avoid kale. Order chocolate cake. Get cancer again. My hand hovered over the ringing wireless phone like it was the first time I'd ever answered it. I inhaled to push down the coldness creeping from my stomach to my chest. I answered the call as I walked from my desk in the kitchen into the darkened dining room adjacent so that I'd be out of earshot of my 10-year-old son, James, who was doing his homework at the counter. I prayed silently, please, please, please. We have the biopsy results, my doctor said. He paused as my prayers raced heaven-bound, and I stammered, I'm sorry to tell you, but you have a small invasive ductal carcinoma in your right breast. We need to run some additional tests to figure out a treatment plan, and it's going to take a week or so. Oh God. My heart, jolted by my body's adrenaline, pounded in my chest, and I was ready to run anywhere, run from this news. 3 small words, invasive ductal carcinoma, and nothing would ever be the same. I knew this. I'd been running from the beast since I was 14. I stood trembling as I replaced the phone in its stand. I didn't smoke. I don't drink, at least not that much. I've tried to eat the right things, except for kale, because it's kale. I worked out, like, why? Why me? Why now? Why? Like, could we not do this again? I'm praying, I'm standing in my kitchen, like, having this mental conversation. And I call that like my Job moment. Like, I'm Job in the desert going, why? We're not getting an answer. We're not getting
Right.
There's no answer.
No answer.
But in that moment of ordinary, and I think this is common to many people who either have had this experience of getting a cancer or other diagnosis, or experience some other loss. It was so banal. My kid was doing his homework. I was about to set the table. Dinner was on the stove. Perfectly ordinary night. And in that moment, the tectonic plates that had underlain, like conjugating. My life, my very organized, planned, listed, ordered life completely shifted. And my timeline broke into what I knew I had before and what I had no idea was going to come next. And that's a scary, scary place. It was just frightening. And, as an adult, because all of a sudden I was like, well, when I was a kid, I was the person being taken care of, but as an adult, I was the caregiver. I had children to get to school and practice and all that stuff. I had a husband who, works a very demanding job, and who was gonna do the things.
Right.
And the idea that I would be sick and not able to do the things, whether it was my own work, my own professional work or my volunteer work or just, being just an ordinary mom, it was paralyzing to me. But I went through it, went through the year, I walked through the forest, and you do feel very alone, I think, when you go through this experience, even if you have the best network around you. And I did. I have a very loving family. I have wonderful friends. But it is ultimately a solitary experience. You have to go through this challenge. And I did. I had a year of chemo and targeted therapy. I had a bilateral mastectomy. I had implant reconstruction. And I'm healthy today and cancer-free, thank God. But I know those experiences left an indelible mark, not just on me, but on my whole family. Yeah. I'm fortunate that my husband is very loving and very supportive, not just of the cancer journey, but also of the book journey. But, there were moments through that year that were just rough on our marriage. I mean, I call it in the book, it was the year of the drought, as in like,
right.
no sex
Right.
like sex life dead in the desert. And he never complained, it just was, I felt so much not like the woman he married, so much not like a woman at all, honestly. I didn't have any hair, I was sick, I felt awful, but here it is, it's a scar, just like my mastectomy scars, it's there. And it was hard on my children. My daughter was away at college, and was, dealing with the stress of not knowing I was well, plus trying to do her classes. My middle son, who was 15, same age I was when I had cancer as a teenager, we had lost his grandfather 3 years earlier to prostate cancer, and Tommy was very, very close to his granddad. And so as he saw me transformed by this disease, he was just horrified, absolutely horrified. And I talked to him about it, later, and he's like, you became a monster to me. He was so scared, and he actually got quite depressed. Like to the point where we needed to get him into therapy, and it took like a whole year for us to get him kind of back. And, he's healthy and fine and in college today, and thank God, but, a lot of scars. And, but I will say this, to not be a total downer. I do believe that this experience we had as a family, and for my children in particular, that they certainly are more resilient for it. And I think they're probably more empathetic. I think they're very kind and able to like sit and listen. If one of their friends, is going through something, because they get it, and that was, I don't want to say the silver lining, because I don't think there's really ever a silver lining when you're talking about like cancer, but certainly it was they were so brave and so strong. And I even think about, it today and how proud I am of the three of them, because, they're stronger for it.
It shapes you for sure, and everybody around you. And that gift of empathy, to get that early is really profound.
Yeah, it is. It is. It'll serve them well, I think.
It will. It will.
So what about you? Because not only do you do grief, but you actually had your own cancer experience.
I did have my own cancer experience.
Another thing that bonded the two of us.
And it was super fun. I was diagnosed in February of 2017 with colon cancer. I don't have any family history of cancer. I was totally sure that I was going to die of a heart attack, like every single person in my family, and so I was comfortable with that. And everybody, and so cancer was just a complete surprise. And it was, and I was 47 then, and I think they have lowered the screening age now for colonoscopies to 45, but at that time it was still 50. So I hadn't yet had a screening colonoscopy. And my primary care doctor was, because of my age and family history and generally good health, he's like, you probably have hemorrhoids, but maybe you should go see somebody. And so I did. And I had a terrible doctor experience. The He was very, very indifferent, bordering on mean. Came in and was just like, you've got cancer, here's a referral, and it was like, and kind of like what you were saying about it being an ordinary day. I had taught that day, I had finished my classes, then my husband and I went to go back for the follow-up after the colonoscopy. I mean, if you have to go back for a colonoscopy follow-up, that it's not
Right.
it's not great. But it still hadn't quite connected for me, because cancer was so far out of what I thought would take me down. and and so then having it presented in that way was actually quite traumatic in and of itself. Just the no compassion, and in and out in under 3 minutes. We drove all, and then we just sat in the parking lot and didn't even know what to do. I live in a small town in northern Arizona, and so I was going to have to go to Phoenix because that's where medical care is. And that's 2 hours away. And, it was just really, it was truly a shock. And I from diagnosis to surgery was 13 days. And in that time I had to get on this class is covered, do the FMLA paperwork. I updated my will. We kind of did this whole kind of, thing that was, and as they can't stage you until they're in there.
Right.
And so you don't even know how bad, it's going to be, and you don't know what they're going to find. And you've watched too many Grey's Anatomies where they get in there and it's like, like, oh my God, she's necrotic from all the way from the, and you just exactly. And nobody looks like McDreamy or McSteamy, or none of the doctors do. So it's such a disappointment. And so I feel like I didn't even begin to start to process what it meant until I was out of surgery, and I did not have any space to do it. And then I had to go back to work because I can't afford to not be at work. So I was at work sooner than I should have been. And I think that complicated the healing process a little bit. This month will be 4 years. So hopefully I have a colonoscopy scheduled in April. So hopefully that will be good news. I know. No symptoms. Now I know. Now I vigilantly am like, what is that? Is this, you just start, every lump, every ache, everything becomes sort of, sort of a new question, and in the memoir that I wrote that'll be out in October, I talk about, there's a quote from Confucius about second lives. Everybody has 2 lives. You realize you have 2 lives, or you move into your second life when you realize you have only one. And it's about that. I've totally butchered that quote, but it's about that defining moment where you're like, oh crap, there really is just this one life as far as we know right now. This is it. And now I really get it in a way that I didn't get it before. And I definitely feel like what you mentioned earlier, that there was a me before and a me now. And there's a through line, like there's certainly the Laraine is still there, but I look back and it's just been, almost 4 years now, and I don't recognize a lot of who that person was. And I can't, I I don't think of the future in the same way either. I don't think, I mean, I still hope for a long life and make reasonable plans for that. But also it's like, well, we should do this now. And, rather than, well, let's wait till all systems line up for the perfect moment. It's like, my husband's 56, I'm 53 now. It's like, let's take this trip, while we can take this trip, because now it's really this awareness of anything could happen, that wasn't quite as prevalent in me before.
Absolutely. That's so true. And I think collectively as a nation, I think we've all had that awakening or experience living through a year of COVID-19.
Yeah,
Like if you've gone through something like cancer or some other trauma where, you have to look your mortality right in the face,
exactly.
say,
Exactly.
you know, we are only stewards for a brief moment on this beautiful planet. So you have to, you know, see, I don't want to do the whole seize the day YOLO thing, but like, you know, you do get a better sense of the immediacy and the presence, the present, and the necessary of the present and living it and not waiting for the stars to align for that perfect moment because you might not get it.
And I think it really helps with discernment, at least for me. You get really clear on, this is something I'm not going to do
Right.
anymore. This is something I would like to do more of. This is something I would like to learn more about. Yeah, no, not this. And like a culling happens of, you know what, this was toxic. This relationship was toxic, or this activity was toxic, or I'm doing this only because I thought it was going to please somebody else. I never wanted to do it, or something. Those things come into really sharp clarity. Um, I think
That's so true. I love that word culling. That's a great image because
it's just like whoop, whoop, whoop. So talk a little bit then about your teenage experiences in that family background. How did they
okay, so
influence?
I come from a, very kind of classic Irish Catholic family where, we'd never talked about certain things like feelings or fear or illness. And the weirdest thing about this was my mom was a nurse, my dad worked in healthcare. Healthcare permeated my family's life.
Wow.
And but illness, like specifically illness related to people you knew, that was like totally taboo.
Yeah.
So when I was diagnosed in 1981, I was 14 years old, and my doctor and my parents sat me down and they said, okay, you have this thing called Hodgkin's disease, which is what Hodgkin's lymphoma was referred to as in 1981.
Okay.
And all my medical records say that. So that was not an untruth. And then they said, it's a blood disease, and you're going to have to go through this thing called radiation therapy. For 3 or 4 months, you're going to have a rough couple of months, but after that, you're going to be fine. So here I am, 14 years old, and I didn't know what this all meant. So I had a splenectomy. I went through three and a half, almost 4 months of radiation therapy at Memorial Hospital in New York City. My family lived in Staten Island at the time, so my parents drove 4 days a week from Staten Island to the Upper East Side of Manhattan so I could have radiation therapy. And one or both of them would walk me through this hospital, and I would have this cognitive disconnect every day because I couldn't understand as we walked through the hallways where there were terribly, terribly sick people. And I mean, we're talking 1981. This was, kids with no hair, people on stretchers and IVs in the hallway. I mean, the whole thing was grim. It was really, really grim. Like I go to my oncologist office now. He has, they built like a new office, probably 20 minutes, 25 minutes from my house. And I call it the cancer spa because it's like tranquil and there's waterfalls and, there's a beautiful chalkboard with inspirational sayings, it was like nothing like Memorial Hospital, now Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital, excellent cancer center, at that time. And I couldn't understand why I had to go to this place where there were all these terrible sick people when all I had was this blood disease. And no one ever used the word cancer around me as a kid. They just didn't. And I don't know when I figured that out. I think, probably as I was going into college, maybe I was able to connect the dots, but definitely not as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I always think of that time, up until the time that I had breast cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma was a box, taped shut, Sharpie markered, stuck in a shelf in the farthest corner of my brain. That's how I visualized it. I never spoke about it. I didn't want to speak about it because in my magical thinking, that would give kind of the power for the cancer to return.
To return, yep.
Right?
Yep.
And I didn't even really speak about it to my current oncologist. And when I was finishing up treatment with him, other than to just give him like a perfunctory medical history, right? He said to me, you had it worse than most people because most people haven't had cancer before. He said, so for you, this was like a whole year of PTSD. And I almost fell out of my chair because I didn't talk about the Hodgkin's. And he saw it. He saw like the ghosts of cancer past were just like floating around my head, like the bunnies with the balloons. They were all there. And when, I reflected on back as I was writing the book, I was like, you actually acted like such a teenager at so many times, like embarrassing to like think about. But the thing that like changed, that really caused like me to change, like there was the way I was like looking at my life, like the culling that Laraine just referred to, was I was out walking my dog while I was in the middle of chemo, no hair, baseball hat on. I ran into a neighbor and she stopped and we had the whole, cancer conversation. And she kept asking what she could do to help. And I kept saying, we're really fine. I'm trying to keep everything kind of normal for the boys, which was kind of stupid because there's nothing normal about having cancer. And she kept insisting. And, I was like, look, when I have my surgery, I'll put you on the meal train, but really we're fine. And she stopped, put her hands on my shoulders and gave me a little shake. And she's like, Chris, stop it. She's like, people want to help. Let the people who care about you care for you. And I was so humbled by that, because I had this, persona, I was the doer, I was the list maker, I was the person who stayed late and cleaned up after the swim meet or drove the kid home from practice or whatever, so for me, that was a real transformational moment. And she left me a gift a few hours later in my mailbox of a little pendant that was a guardian angel on it that I wore from every day from then out until I finished treatment. And to remind myself that it was okay. It was okay to not be the one in control. And that was really, for me, when I look back on all of it, that's what changed my story from a story about cancer to a story about hope.
Mm-hmm.
It was that moment that did it for me.
I think that's a real familiar moment for a lot of people. I mean, the learning how to accept help was so hard for me. I will help anyone. I will do anything for anyone. I will come to class early, stay later, we're the same person. I would do this whole thing, and then, but to have, someone do things for me. And colon cancer is not a fun one to talk about.
No.
And it's not the things you need help with are not things you want to be having help with. And it was just, it made me think about how not great I am about asking for what I need, how I would rather give to other people and would rather, you know, kind of try to maintain control that way.
Do you want to open this to questions?
Yeah,
Coming up on like 5 of 8.
sure.
Um,
Absolutely.
and we've talked a lot.
We could talk a lot. Yeah, if anyone has a question, because we have such a lovely small group, you just need to unmute yourself. Or I think Chris can unmute everyone, but I think she has that superpower.
I do. Hold on. I have to figure out how to do it. Well, it's up here someplace, right? Okay. All right, here we go. All right, friends, you're just going to have to unmute yourself because I don't have that superpower. I'm not as Zoom savvy as Laraine is. No?
No pressure at all.
No
Oh,
pressure.
this is Alice in Denver. Can you hear me?
Oh, hi, Alice. Yes.
Okay,
we
yeah,
can.
Thanks for coming.
I just want to thank you for being so vulnerable and open. And I mean, that was some of the things you said were just poetic. They're beautiful
Oh,
and heartfelt. And thank you.
thank you. I really appreciate that. It was such a gift to meet Chris and to be able to share. I feel like we have, we could obviously talk for 6 hours on this and this topic. And yeah, it's a gift to be able to share it. It's one of the gifts of having any experience that's traumatic too. It's like, what can you take from it eventually after you actually face it, not ignore that it's happening, but after you face it and then bring it to the world, you know, that's
A gift to have shared it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have something in the chat from Jean. Just says thank you. Thank you. This was enlightening and touching. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you, Jean.
Oh, go ahead, Jen. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that I'm so grateful that you did this now and you're putting this out now, because we're just in this incredible time of grief right now, just collectively, and I don't think that's being talked about enough. And you know, you just look around and, you know, we still have our personal grief on our individual things that are going on, like you two are talking about, that hasn't stopped. And then we have these,
No, it doesn't stop, right?
right. And then we have these other layers and a sort of a chronic grief situation. And I think the communing in that just helps us. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Hi there.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. This is so helpful. My husband actually is in the midst of esophageal cancer that is metastasized. So I am his caregiver and his partner of 40 plus years. And so I'm really needing guidance. And so your book about grief is extremely helpful because, you know, while he's alive, there's grief going on. And then, of course, you know, in losing him, there's a huge amount of grief. And so I'm just looking for help. And your book looks like it's going to be a great help in that way. Yeah, and your stories, thank you so much. I mean, hearing it from your perspectives, you know, because I'm trying to tap into what's going on with him, and he's pretty open about it. But at the same time, you know, he's going through his own process. So, so anyway, yeah, this is a huge help. So thank you so much. Are there other people who've written about grief that you like and feel are also good and positive and helpful?
Yeah. I'm gonna I'm going to go where everyone goes now and look on Amazon.
Oh,
And just, no, just so I get the right, so I just get the right exact. There is a book that was really helpful for me. It's probably not the right time for it for you, but it's called the Grief Recovery Handbook. And I didn't find that book until probably, I don't know, almost 17 or 18 years after my dad died when I was young. That was one of my initial struggles.
right.
And I really messed up. I had a challenging time dealing with that. And when I found that book and it actually spoke to me like a person,
Hmm.
I felt heard. I felt like my grief had been recognized, and I could start to see how maybe some of the choices that I was making were actually not me being an idiot, but me responding to unresolved trauma,
Mhm.
and being able to, to kind of not be so hard on myself for some poor choices. And I found that to be, good. It's hard to, I do think my book is unique because I couldn't find a book like it, like
Right,
kind of
that's what you
like
said.
what Chris
Yeah.
was saying,
Yes,
like
yes.
her book, you want to find the book that you couldn't find when you were
Right.
looking for it,
Right.
Great.
and I think that's so hard. There's a book called It's Okay That You're Not Okay.
Mm.
That was, I wanted to look up the author of that, is Megan Devine.
Mhm.
A book called Finding Meaning, The Sixth Stage of Grief.
Oh,
Are you familiar with Hope Edelman's work at all?
no.
She's, her most famous book is Motherless Daughters. She like her big work is on the mother wound.
Oh,
But she's got a book that just came out this year called The After Grief, Finding Your Way Along the Long Arc of Loss. And it's a really beautiful book. It talks about, that really it's not like we're done with our grief in 48 hours or the allowed 6-month period of time, or, it's something, I mean, we deal with grief all the time by being alive.
sure.
And so those are the kind of books that I've found to be helpful, books that recognize that grief is not pathological. It's part of being human,
Mhm.
and anybody who's selling you the quick fix through it is
Sure.
lying.
Yeah.
Just someone who can be straight up honest. And I think it might, you might really enjoy Chris's book as well, even though you're the caregiver and it's a different kind of cancer. The caregiver is often forgotten in this process.
Yeah.
The focus is on the person who's sick.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
And
And this isn't a grief book per se,
Mhm.
but it's it's a beautiful memoir. It's called Let the Whole Thundering World Come Home.
oh, that's so
It's
good.
by Natalie Goldberg, who is, a writer, a writer's writer,
Mhm.
but it's her memoir of her cancer experience. And she had a rare leukemia or something, like a blood
Just
one.
something, yeah.
And her partner's experience at the same time. So they were
Mhm.
both patient and both caregiver.
Oh, wow.
And it's just, she's a Zen Buddhist as well. So it's got that whole sort of meditative quality to it. And it might not be a book you want to read right now, but it's excellent. And it was, I read it, I think it came out in 2017. When I read it, I was like, if this had come out, a year earlier, I wouldn't be sitting here trying to write a book. That's not entirely true, but it's really worth the read.
Yeah, I think it's important to know that all, and you'll intuitively know if the book is the right book for you at that time,
Sure.
and some books you just need a while before you can read,
Mhm.
like I couldn't read When Breath Becomes Air.
Oh,
Oh my
gosh.
God, I have
Oh,
read it now, but oh
that's
my
a
God,
killer.
I,
No, yeah.
I don't, no one's dying. I'm not reading anything about anyone dying. I'm not watching TV about anyone dying, trying to find TV with no one dying. I'm not going to watch anything like, nobody,
Oh,
because I can't take it in because it's too close in my actual life.
That
you
makes
know.
sense. Yeah, that
Um,
book is a killer. It's
oh,
true.
it's so beautiful, but oh, and also Joan Didion's The Year of
Oh,
Magical
oh
Thinking.
yeah, I've read that. Yes.
Yeah,
Yep. That's really good.
yeah,
Yeah. Thank you very, very much.
sure.
I mean, this whole period of time is so intense.
It is.
So every level is like, yeah, like Jan was saying, it's
It
the
is.
layering of it all is.
Mhm. And I think we're all like what Jean was saying, there's our personal life, because that doesn't stop with COVID and all
Yeah.
this other stuff. But then there is just this collective stress and loss and change that we have no control over.
Right.
That is reopening some of these unresolved things and making our own personal griefs harder
Yeah.
because of the isolation and the
Exactly. That's huge. That's huge. Yeah, there's no ground. There's no ground to stand on.
it's a
It's
great way. Yeah.
groundless right now. Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You.
Chris, do you see Alice's question in the chat?
Look. Where we'll be able to find the recorded session. So what I will do is download this and I will upload it to a YouTube video because they're easier to access that way.
Mhm.
So, and I guess we could, and Laraine and I can post it on our websites,
Mm-hmm.
so you could access it.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to put, there's just a few of us here. If you want to put your emails in the chat, we could email you the link.
Or we can email it to you. I just didn't want to
Great.
bug you for your email.
Yeah, no, right. Sign up for one more list.
One more email.
So she did put her email in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it'll take me a little while to do that, to download it, to upload it.
That's okay. Thank you.
We're learning, everyone is learning to be these great technical engineers in 2020 and 2021 too.
And we're also learning to be very patient.
So patient,
that's a
which is,
good
I think,
thing.
really good.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it is.
As hard as work has been at the college with this, I am seeing a softness around, oh, that's my dog that just walked through our meeting, right? Or that's my cat, or like there's more awareness that we're actually people having lives outside of, we're not just workers,
Right.
And I hope that'll stay.
Lots of gifts in this weirdness. So thank you. I need to run.
Of course. Thank
have
you.
dinner in Denver. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Alice.
you all so much for joining
Bye-bye.
tonight. It was really lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Bye, Jan.
Bye, Jan.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we have 2 emails.
Okay.
I don't know if your chat will save or not, so I wanted.
Google Drive. Let's see. Connect. All right, authorize. So many accounts.
I know.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Let's see if it's. Let's see. I'll check it later. But I'll also do it the old-fashioned way and just write it down.
Write it down. I know, right?
That's easy. Gmail. And Wendy Cobb. Okay.
that was really fun. I really enjoyed
Fun.
talking.
Thank you, Laraine.
Yeah, it was really, really fun.
It was good. And I'm so looking forward to your class. And like I got that email today and you were like, underneath. I was like, because I stupidly signed up for another one of Lydia's classes over the summer, like right before I had to get full blown into the book,
Yeah,
which I shouldn't have done. But it was on palimpsests, narrative palimpsests, which is all about underneath.
all about
And
underneath.
I started writing. I have like two essays sitting here in my drawer. They've been in my drawer since August.
Wow.
That I haven't
Wow.
touched. And
Wow.
so that's what I'm doing.
That's so cool.
That's what I'm gonna do with you.
Okay. I'm not sure what we're gonna do. I'm kind of like thinking on it and what might people